us anxious folk. My name is Lauren. I am your host, and today's episode is going to be just a little bit of a chat, I guess, about something that I came across recently, which really opened up a lot of time and space for reflection of my anxiety and my life and why I think I've struggled so much with feeling anxious and frozen. Now, I was recently listening to a podcast, and I am going to do my best to link that podcast, even though it was one of those things where you just click on a random YouTube video in the morning and just listen to it as you're driving to work. But I'll do my best to find it. Anyway, I think it was loosely about anxiety, and the host asked a question, and then the guest said something to the tune of all anxiety is separation anxiety. And it was such a casual statement, but it was a way I've never heard anxiety talked about. You've heard, or I've heard anxiety being talked about as a threat, the alarm system, or the alarm system that signifies the threat. You hear it talked about as a natural instinct, a survival instinct, gets talked about as fight or flight a lot, gets talked about as a fear of the future, or a need to control. And I think it is all of those things, but I've just never heard someone flat out say so casually, all of anxiety is separation anxiety. And I was thinking that's a bold statement to make. Wow, that's a big sort of blanket statement. And I don't know if that's entirely accurate. But it niggled at me all day, and I started thinking about it, and I realized how true that was for me. Now, obviously, I'm not speaking for anyone else's experience with anxiety, because I don't know your experience with anxiety, and how that sort of manifests for you, but I definitely know my own experience with anxiety. And I wouldn't have said I'm someone who experiences separation anxiety in the realm of anxiety, if that makes sense. I'm definitely someone who experiences it in romantic relationships, but that's kind of where it's been the most prevalent for me. I haven't really experienced it in terms of when my anxiety flares, I'm not scared to be alone. I prefer to be on my own in that moment. I don't necessarily have a safe person. When, I had driving anxiety and stuff, it was all I want to be by myself. I don't want to be with someone else. And so if you'd said to me, anxiety is separation anxiety, I would have been that doesn't make sense, because I much prefer to be alone. However, going back and thinking about when my anxiety started to first kick in, I think I can definitely say that my anxiety most started to kick in when I started to feel really abnormal compared to everyone around me. And the way that manifested for me was, starting to deal with IBS. And at the time, I think I've spoken about this before, when my anxiety first started to get really bad was when I was working at a teenage sort of clothing store. And it was kind of for the cool kids, and I've never been one of the cool kids, and I've never really identified with that. And I always felt out of place. I always felt I didn't know how to put an outfit together. I didn't know what to wear. I wasn't very good at selling the clothes. I didn't really, I just didn't really know how to go about that job. And then at that same time started dealing with IBS issues. And so there was a lot of that fear of needing to go to the bathroom and fear of kind of embarrassing myself. And that's when I really pinpointed that fear of being embarrassed was that fear of being separate, and that fear of being shamed is also that fear of being separate. And I was like, wow, okay, so maybe a lot of my anxiety has been separation anxiety. I've also noticed how, in my relationship, my previous relationship with my eldest daughter's dad, how when I started to feel like our life wasn't looking the way it was supposed to look, that started to make me feel really anxious. There was this like overarching sense in my life that things weren't right and things weren't how they were for everyone else around me, and I didn't feel how everyone around me felt. And it was just this sense of like not fitting into the world properly. And I think this is true for most, if not all of us. I think all of us have that deep sense of like not fitting in at the end of the day. I think that's just like a human trait. But in terms of like how this kind of made me act was to separate even further. So, starting to deal with panic and anxiety and starting to deal with like urgent diarrhea and stomach cramps and things like that, wanting to not talk about that, wanting to hide that as much as I possibly could. And then that meant that I couldn't get to work on time, or I wanted to leave work early, or I, had to take bunches and bunches of pills in order to be able to go out with friends. Like, it was all like, I have to hide this, I have to suppress this, because if other people see it, it's going to make me separate from them. I have to somehow save face and stay like keep up this persona of who I think other people think I am, lest they realize that I am not one of them. And so there was so much time and energy and resources spent on trying to fix myself. And what that did, like I said, was caused more separation, which ultimately increased my anxiety. And so it was like I was running on this hamster wheel of like trying desperately to make myself feel connected by disconnecting myself even further. And I mean, you can kind of zoom out and think like agoraphobia is like the ultimate sense of separation, like not being able to leave your house. You quite literally separate yourself from life. And I really did get to a point where I didn't feel real anymore. Like the things I were feeling seemed so intense and so dramatic. And it was like I could kind of look at the outside world and see that, people were doing normal things like going to work and going out for walks and going out for coffee and like going on holidays and like all this going. And I was just completely still because like there was just so much happening within me that wouldn't allow me to do those normal things. And again, that was that separation. And so it was like I had to completely block myself and cut myself off from the mere possibility of being able to join in with that, because I wasn't right. I wasn't okay. I wasn't one of them. And I didn't know how to make my body be one of them. How to make my mind be one of them. And, I'd go to the doctor, or I'd ring my doctor during the times when I couldn't actually leave the house. And I'd be like, this medication isn't working. It's making me feel weird. It's doing this, it's doing that. And he'd be like, well, those are just the expected side effects. Like, that's normal. You have to give it time. But I didn't have time, because I'm like, this is only increasing that sense of separation. Like, now I'm starting to feel separate from myself. And I think that was the most jarring thing, was I had, and started out feeling separate from everyone around me. But when I started to separate from myself, that's when shit got scary. And that's when I was like, I don't know how to move through the world if I'm not connected in here. I felt so unhinged. And I talk about this in a chapter in my book, but there was a day where I just woke up and I'm like, this isn't real. This life isn't real. Like, I am not real. This can't be happening, Like, it felt like if I screamed as loud as I possibly could, it was like, is anyone even going to hear that? Is any sound even going to come out? And that was when I was like, okay, I've lost touch here. I've lost touch with reality. But again, I think what that really was just such an intense feeling of being separate that I had no like anchor. I had no way to come back into myself, or to come back into the world around me that felt safe. And that was the most fucked up place to be. Excuse my French. So yeah, toilet anxiety, separation. Social anxiety, separation. And just like agoraphobia, as I said, separation. Panic attacks and panic disorder, separation. It's that sense that like, when you're in a line at a grocery store and like you start to panic and you're desperately trying to contain yourself, but no one around you can tell what's happening, because you're trying so hard not to be separate. You're trying so hard to be like everybody else. And I've had that thought in my head before where I've thought, please, God, just let me be, standing in the line. Just let me be walking down the street like that person is. Just let me be having breakfast like that person is. Like, just let me fucking be. Instead of trying so hard to grasp at everything. Let me be not having to think about that. I think it's that annoying, like, paradox where the more we try to grasp at feeling connected, the further disconnected we feel. If our grasping at connection is coming from a place of not wanting to be separate, if that makes sense. I've also considered how in my life, like, it's really difficult for me to kind of do the things I know I should do. What I mean by that is like a lot of self-sabotage has come up so many times in my life, and my default response is to freeze. That's been true for so many stages of my life. I can't tell you how many times I froze when trying to create this podcast. And in fact, I had to do a podcast first with someone else in order to feel like I could cope with doing a podcast at all. Like I waited for someone to come to me and say, hey, did you want to start doing a podcast? Before I was like, yes, I do. With my book proposal, like I had to go and do a workshop on it in order to feel like I was able to submit a proposal. There's just like, in order to start like meditating properly, I had to go and do a meditation course that would, certify me as a meditation teacher in order to feel okay to teach meditation. And even then, I haven't really done much with that. Like I organized a meditation class, and I didn't have any people that bought like tickets to it, and so I cancelled it because I was like, well, this is not happening, so I'm just not going to do that. So many times in my life where that freeze has just overwhelmed me, and I just haven't made any movement at all. And then I look around in my life and I see my friends and family like doing these things, like identifying a goal and then moving towards it. And when I thought about this being related to that separation anxiety, what became really clear was I'm really good at doing things for work. I'm really good at doing things when I know what my tasks are. When someone else tells me what it is that I need to do, I am magnificent at doing it. Like, I love my job because I'm good at it, and I love being able to do that. And I've always been like, but I'm so productive at work. How come I'm not productive when it comes to myself? And I think it's that I'm not separate when somebody else is telling me how I need to do things. I'm not separate when I'm at work and I'm in a team of people and we're all kind of moving towards a common goal. I'm like so ensconced in the group that I feel like I can like thrive. You know, I feel like I can do my job really well because I'm in this team. But when it comes to me having to go a separate way and there's no like script for that, there's no instruction manual, you know, I have so many ideas of like what I want to do with this sort of passion about mental health and anxiety, and I keep trying to force myself down a path that is already laid out because I can't bring myself to create my own path because that takes me away. And it might eventually lead me back. Do you know what I mean? It might bring more people towards me ultimately, but it's that initial part of going out on my own and doing something different that scares the fuck out of me. And instead of, you know, for some people that fear propels them forward, like that sense of separation is like what sort of drives them. That fear of being separate is what drives them to create. Whereas for me, that fear is what shuts me down. It's what contracts me, because I'm like, I don't want to do anything that draws attention to myself in a negative way. I don't want to be different, even if consciously I understand that I do want to be different and I do want to be unique. Unconsciously, my body's like, no, you do not want that. Like you just want to be in the team. You just want to be in the family. You just want to be accepted and loved. And anything you do that takes you away from that potentially is not okay. And you need to just contract and shut down and get anxious and not make any kind of move at all, in case it's the wrong one, in case you fuck up. And that's been really crippling. That has been really, really crippling. And yeah, it was only that small statement that guest made on the podcast about anxiety being separation anxiety that even brought me to that conclusion. And I was like, wow, this has played a huge role in my life that I haven't even been aware of. And so I kind of wanted to bring this to you guys in case for somebody else this is relevant for you as well. This came up when I was speaking to one of my recent podcast guests about, you know, sharing her story, and she was saying that she's going to share the podcast episode on her business Instagram, and I was like, what the fuck? Like, I remember thinking, like, not like that's a bad thing to do, but I was like, wow, that is a brave thing to do. Because, you know, when people from work ask for my Instagram, I always give them like I have a personal Instagram where I share like pictures of my family and stuff, and that's only for people I know like physically, in person, because obviously sharing pictures of my kids and stuff, I don't want it to be like a public Instagram. But then I have like the Lauren Rose Instagram where it's like my business, I guess you'd say. And yeah, when people from work ask for my Instagram, I always give them the personal one, because I'm like, you know, the personal Lauren, you know what I mean? Like, I don't want them to, I guess I am a little bit afraid of them knowing that I have this like other part of me that speaks about mental health and speaks about fear and toilet anxiety and shame and separation, and, you know, does a podcast and makes YouTube videos. And it's like, that's scary, them knowing that part of me, which makes me really consider like which is the real aspect. You know what I mean? Like, what I share with you guys is like my most vulnerable stuff, and yet it's the people I know in person that I don't want to see that stuff. It's weird. Again, maybe it's that separation thing of like, I don't want to be separate from the crowd that I know, that I see day to day. So it's like I keep up this, you know, like, yeah, like Lauren persona that's like, you know, a little bit kooky, but not like, doesn't talk about full on stuff. I just went off tangent a bit. But where was I even going with that? Oh yeah. So she was saying that she's going to share this on her business page. And I was like, that's really that's really brave. And she was like, I'm not scared to share my story anymore. I know that there are people in my business life that deal with this vulnerable stuff, and I want to be open about that because that might help them. It helps me. And I was like, wow, that sense of trying to keep things separate because you don't want to feel separate is intense, and it makes you feel worse. Whereas what she was doing, which I thought was so admirable, was she was willing to connect the pieces. She was willing to connect everything. And, I just have so much fear in doing that a lot of the time. And it's something I'm exploring. And I'm going to work towards. But so what that brings me to is when my anxiety started to ease, and I've always said this, was when I started actually talking about it. When I started the whole Anxiety Mama blog. Yeah, when I started that blog and I started talking about how I felt, and then I took the big leap and I shared the blog with people I knew in my real life. Like, that was intense. But when I did that, when I started actually shining a light on the places in which I felt the most separate, that was when that separation started to dissipate completely. Making the YouTube videos, like I was so scared to do that because I'm like, I can't possibly go on the internet talking about the fear of needing to like use the bathroom, the fear of accidentally shitting my pants. Like, I cannot talk about that. But when I did, it just helped so much. It helped me so much. Like, it was a real sort of selfish endeavor because it eased things for me so much. And I've found that again and again, when I have deliberately connected, is when that sense of separation has disappeared, and I've healed those parts of myself that feel terrified of being different. And I think that's why, practices that I harp on about all the time have been so important to me. For example, yin yoga and meditation. Is there an episode where I don't talk about one of these two things? I don't think so. But yeah, yoga is union. Like, it's a reunion with self, and meditation is to become familiar with yourself. So it's these practices that are designed to bridge that gap between who you want to be and who you're scared you are. And you sort of bring awareness to both of those parts, and in doing that, you bring them back together. And these are the practices that have helped me with my anxiety again and again and again, and still do. And whenever things are getting hard, I know that these are the things that I need to go back to. I need to go back to being open. I need to go back to practices that bring me home to myself and connect me with the people around me. So cultivating a sense of who you are was something that also really helped in this sense. After the breakup with my eldest dad, I had no sense of who I was beyond the fact that I was someone who was anxious, and I was someone who was afraid, and I was someone who was not where I was supposed to be. And so really starting to delve into, who am I? Like, what do I like? What do I enjoy doing? What do I not enjoy doing? What do I want? Like, who the fuck am I? Figuring that out, and then creating a life that nurtured that person. That was a really underrated way of easing that sense of separation, because I've spoken about this before, but when you are somebody who deals with panic and anxiety, and like long-term panic and anxiety and intense panic and anxiety, your sense of who you are crumbles, and you feel so far away from yourself, and you don't know how to get that relationship back. And this is how you get that relationship back. You start figuring out who you are. When are the times that you feel most like yourself? When are the times that you feel lit up? When are the times that you feel comfortable? When are the times that you feel like you might love yourself? You know, what is it that you like? What is it that you don't like? Really get clear on all of that. And then how can you like structure your day so that it honors that? For me, there were things like I really like playing like soul music through the house. So like, putting on a playlist that I really love. I really like drinking tea. I really like reading books. Filling my space with like blankets and books, and having lots of cups of tea, and giving myself time, you know, of an evening to like sit and read a book with a cup of tea, rather than you know, doing what I feel like I should be doing what I actually love doing, and creating space for that and nurturing that and respecting that. That was how I started to come home to myself, and that was how I started to heal that sense of separation from who I am. And yeah, healing the separation from the world around you, that starts by being open about what you're feeling, because that's when you realize that there's way more people than you ever would have thought feeling the exact same way you are feeling. You know, I happened to say to my neighbor the other day that I'm on antidepressants, and he was like, me too. And I'm like, wow, I wouldn't have picked that. So, you know, that was a cool conversation, and now I feel more connected to him, which is really cool. So being open doesn't mean you have to go out there and spew, you know, every single thing about you. You can hold some things back, but the places where you feel shame are probably the places where you need to shine a light on, and you need to be a bit more open about, because those are the parts that feel the most separate, and those are the parts that need to find connection. So being open about what you're feeling, connecting physically, like how can you physically connect to the world? How can you get out there, whether or not that's like just going for a walk and smiling at the people that you walk past, or joining some kind of group, like going to a church group, or going to you know, an exercise class, or like whatever it is for you. Joining some kind of group and connecting physically that way, connecting to your body. So again, like I said, yoga or meditation, or like, you know, dancing, or whatever your practice is, the gym also, connecting in that way to your body, and then connecting to like your dreams and your hopes and your goals. I will link a video in which I spoke about this in a bit more detail. That was really important as well. All of these things work together to start to give us a sense of connection in every aspect, and that's when we can start feeling a little less anxious. Like that's when we start to feel some space to breathe, and we're like, oh. And I think a lot of the time with people who struggle incessantly with anxiety and can't seem to get out of that bad place, I don't know, my thoughts is that perhaps their focus is on how to fix the anxiety so that they can stop feeling separate. And they need to fix that. They have to fix it in order to be able to connect. But it doesn't work that way, at least in my experience. It works by really exploring the anxiety and connecting with the anxiety. And, you know, sort of moving your focus towards like, how can you connect rather than how can you fix so that then you can connect. Because when you do that, when you're focusing on how can you fix so that you connect, you are expanding that gap. You are making yourself feel more separate. However, when you are focused on just how can you connect, the gap just gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until it's not there anymore. And you're like, wow, for the longest time, I haven't been focused on fixing my anxiety, and it actually has seemed to like mostly resolve. Like what? I found this time and time again. I think that's why things like travel and getting out there and exposure therapy in general. I mean, exposure therapy works because you're sort of teaching your brain that the thing that you're so afraid of isn't something that you necessarily have to be afraid of, really. After all, it was like, you know, the monster under your bed that you don't look at is scarier than looking under your bed and realizing that there's not a monster there. wow, that that train of thought just went way off the rails. I was really going somewhere with that. I don't know. It's gone. I was going somewhere with that. Maybe you know where I was going with that and you can finish the thought yourself, but it just disappeared. I don't know why. But yeah, look, ultimately what I'm hoping to say with this episode is just really to kind of like inspire some reflection on, has this been true for you? This idea that all of anxiety is really at its core separation anxiety, and in what ways can you start to focus on connection rather than trying to fix what you feel isn't right and is holding you back from connection. I hope you're all doing really well, and I will see you in the next episode with hopefully a steadier train of thought. Okay, take care. Thank you for listening to the Us Anxious Folk podcast, the podcast for the chronically overwhelmed, perpetually panicked, anxious folk in all of us. If you would like to find more about me, you can find me on YouTube at Lauren Rose or on Instagram at Lauren R_Rose.